Hey everybody, welcome to this video. Today we're going to be talking about web scraping in Python with requests and BeautifulSoup. If you're new here, my name is McKay and I currently work as a data scientist at a small startup. I do make a lot of videos about Python, coding, data science, sports analytics. If you're interested in that, be sure to hit the subscribe button so you can get notified when there's new videos. But today, let's jump into web scraping and specifically web scraping in Python. So we're going to go over 5 things for web scraping. The first one is we're going to go over what even is web scraping. The next, we'll go over the packages that you're going to need to be able to do web scraping. Then I'm going to show a little tutorial on how you can actually make a request to a website, get the data from the website. And then after we make the request to that website, I'll show you how you can gather and parse that data. And then finally, I'll just mention a couple of tricks to getting around some tricky websites. So what even is web scraping? Web scraping is using code, using Python in this example, to go to a website using that code and to gather information from the website. The website stores this information in HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and we can go and we can actually gather information and data from a page, and we can extract that information and kind of use it for our own purposes of data analysis, data science, whatever. Most people use web scraping for data collection and research purposes. There is a lot of controversy around if it's legal or illegal, but I'll get into that in a different video. So I'll jump over to the computer and I'll show you the packages that you're going to need to be able to do web scraping, and then as well we will get into the making a request and getting information from a website. So the first thing that we will need to be able to do this is we're going to need 2 packages installed on our computer using pip. So pip allows us to install packages, if you're unfamiliar with that. And what you can do is you can install these 2 packages, requests and BS4, which contains BeautifulSoup, which allows us to kind of parse the data. So requests allows us to go and get information from a website, and then BeautifulSoup will allow us to parse that data. So what we're going to do first thing is you just need to make sure that these are installed. So you can just say pip install requests. I already have it installed, so it's going to tell me that it's already all satisfied. Otherwise, it is going to do a whole download thing. Same thing with BeautifulSoup. So we're not actually going to install BeautifulSoup because it's a submodule of a different package. So all you need to do is say pip install BS4. So BS4 is the package that contains BeautifulSoup. And it said that I already have BeautifulSoup, so I don't know what else it installed, but it installed something. So it looks something like this if you don't have it. And then you can tell when something has installed successfully. It'll just give you this little message right here that says successfully installed. So now let's jump over to a Jupyter notebook and I'll show you how you can actually use these 2 packages to make a request and gather information from a website. So if you open up Jupyter Notebook and then you can go into wherever, you can make a new Python 3 file. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to import the packages. So we'll just say import requests, and then we'll say from BS4, that's the package we installed, import BeautifulSoup. So BeautifulSoup is the submodule of BS4, like I mentioned. So you can just run that. So once you have those set up, and in Jupyter Notebook, if it runs successfully, it just gives you this little number 1 right here. So let's actually make a request to a website. So we'll go to google.com. And as you can see right here, this is Google's basically their main website, their main page. And what we can do is we can use Python to go and get everything off this web page. So the way we do this is we use requests, and we'll just say response equals requests.get, and then you just need to pass in the full URL. It does need the HTTPS with the colon and the forward slashes, and then it does need to be a string. So you got to put it in a string, so it needs to be a string type. And we run that, and it looks like it ran successfully. So there's a couple of things we can do to check to make sure that it actually ran successfully. The first thing is called a status code. So if we say response.status code, it gives us a 200, which means the request worked, the request was successful. And status codes are actually really important to know in web scraping if you're going to be using any sort of requests. And this, well, like with the APIs and with any sort of sending information and getting information back. So a couple common ones are a 200, which we just saw means the request was successful. If it's a 403, that means forbidden. It usually means that if you're web scraping, that you're being blocked, like they're doing a good job of blocking your requests. They can kind of tell that you're web scraping and they're trying to stop you from, scraping their data. As well, it can mean like if you're working with an API that you're missing credentials. If you run into a 404, this is a really common one. This means that the website does not exist, so the URL doesn't exist. And then another really common status code is a 500 status code, which usually means something to do with a server error. So that's usually something on the websites or the server's end, and it's not really anything that you can solve in the current moment. So requests actually provides a couple of other tools that we can use to get the data. So if we want to look at the page source, which is basically just a combination of all of the HTML and CSS. So for example, if you come to Google, if you're in Google Chrome and you hit view page source, you can also type view source : in the URL. This is all of the HTML and CSS and sometimes the JavaScript code that's being returned to you. So if you want to see all that in our code here, you can just say response.text, not source code. I was looking at status code while I was typing that. So response.text will return essentially that same thing that we were just looking at. So for example, here's like the head of the thing. Here's the HTML. Here's a meta something. But as you can tell, this is kind of hard to read, especially if you have websites that are huge HTML and CSS. This can be nearly impossible to read unless you know exactly what you're looking for. Another thing that you can do is you can actually look at the URL that got returned. So if you say response.url, you can make sure that you're going to the correct URL. But unfortunately, there's not too much that we can actually do with Google because there's not a lot of data just on this page right here. So what we're going to do is we are going to go over to Nike.com and we can see if we can get some of their data from there. So what we'll do is we'll go over to men, we'll go to new releases, it'll load, new men's, and then let's click into shoes. So right here, this is the URL, new men's shoes. So what we can do is we can just take this exact URL and we can make a request to that URL. So we say response equals request.get. We run it. It kind of took a little bit, and then we can just say response.statuscode, make sure it went through. Okay, we got a 200. And if we wanted to, we could say response.text and see all of the HTML and CSS that was returned. But what we're going to do now is I'll show you how you can actually use BeautifulSoup to parse out the data that we're looking for. So, for example, if we wanted to return information about each shoe, right? So the cool thing about using Google Chrome to do all this is they have something called the Chrome Dev Tools, which allow you to kind of you can select on the actual website. So if we're on this website, we can go and we can find the HTML and the CSS that we're actually looking for. So if you right click and then hit inspect, it'll bring this thing up. And this is just basically the source code formatted nicely, and as well it gives us kind of all the different elements and the selectors and everything from the HTML and CSS. And as well, there's JavaScript back here. So the cool thing about using this tool is that we can now see like what is associated with what. So for example, if we highlight over here on these, when we highlight one, it'll show you like where this is on the page in blue. So if we keep going down, we just keep going. So this product card body right here, this div product card body is associated with this, and I assume it's just replicated. Yeah, here's another one. So that's kind of a term that they use to associate all of these together. So what we're going to do is I think there's 24 on a page or something. So what we're going to do is we're going to just extract information about every single one of them. So we already made the request to the website, so now we'll just parse out the information that is associated with it. So what you can do is you can actually come up here to this arrow with the box right here, and it allows you to select an individual element to make sure that we're getting exactly what we want. So if we come over here, and you can kind of see that it will allow us to choose. So if we want something around here, it says that we just chose this product card link overlay. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to take this entire product card body right here, and we're just going to look for this product card body when we're parsing the data out. So the first thing that you do when you're parsing out the data is you say soup. It's just a variable name. You can call it whatever you want, but soup is usually what you'll see used. Soup equals beautiful soup with a capital B and a capital S. And then we're going to pass in the response.text. Response.text, which allows us to pass in the source code. And then we're going to use something called an HTML.parser. So this is just an argument which tells us how we want to parse this text. So beautiful soup will take this response.text and then it's going to parse it with this HTML parser, and it's going to make it so that like all the divs and all the different elements from the HTML are going to be associated so that we can actually parse it. And honestly, to be successful with web scraping, you do need to understand how web pages work and how web elements work to be able to understand what you're looking for and how you can get it the most effectively. Otherwise, it's not as effective and you might get the wrong data, you might get the wrong elements, you might get something confused with something else. So learning a little bit of HTML and CSS will definitely help you in the long run. So if we run this, we now have this soup object. And what we can do is we can use a couple of these different beautiful soup methods to then extract the data based on looking for this class or this div with this class name product card. I think that's 2 underscores body, right? So what we can do is we can say data equals soup.select. So the .select is actually going to allow you to select all the elements on a web page that have this pattern, right? So we'll say we're looking for, in a string, we're looking for a div, because that's what it says right here, right? This is the HTML, it's a div. And then this, we put it in brackets and we say class equals, and then we just need to make sure it looks exactly how it did on here. So you can double click into this if you want, and it allows you to select just that. So I'll actually delete this and then just copy and paste it, get rid of that extra C. So it needs to say div bracket class equals, and then in double quotes, just needs to look exactly how it is, and then we close it off with another bracket. So let's run that, and we can say data. So if we just want to look at the data, so right now kind of looks a little weird, right? Because it's returning those actual elements. So it's returning everything. That's why we use this HTML parser, is because it turns basically the text into a bunch of different elements, right? So if we just want the text that's associated with it, it returns a list of all these elements. So what we're going to do is we're just going to loop through all of these just to print them out and so we can see. It's a pretty long list, but you could definitely extract a couple of different things from each item that is in this list. So for example, one item would look like this. So if we just take the first one, this is what an entire item looks like. And this is essentially what is on the front page. So if we were to go look at it, right, it's just all of this right here that it returned. And what it did is it returned all 24 that have this exact same div class name set up. So what we're going to do is we can now just loop through all of these, and we can say for x and data, and then we can just say print x.text. And there we go. So obviously this isn't super useful, but what you can do is you can start collecting all of this. You can start collecting different information about all the shoes, and you can start storing that data, whether you want to store it in like a CSV or you just want to store it in like a relational database or a NoSQL database. So say you wanted to run some sort of analysis on the price to see what the most common price was or something, or how the page is organized by price and see like, are the highest priced items at the top when you load it, or is it the lowest price? What are they trying to push? Be some cool analysis that you could do there. And as well, you could see you could do titles, some natural language processing on the titles. Now that you have this data and you have access to it through code, it makes it a lot easier to do this stuff rather than having to go out and maybe like manually collect data. That would be a nightmare. Or if you had to go and talk to Nike and be like, hey, I want all your product titles, a list of all your product titles, it's probably going to be a lot harder to get that than if you just web scrape their web page and their website. So for scraping Nike, that one's pretty straightforward. They didn't do a lot to actually stop us from web scraping them. I mean, we're not really accessing any sort of like private data or data about like their customers or anything. We're just looking at their products and the prices essentially. Some websites do go out of their way though to try and stop web scrapers and web scraping. So one of them is actually TikTok. So if we try to make a request to tiktok.com, so we'll just say response equals request.get, then we go to HTTPS, then we do www.tiktok.com. So if we run this, then we can see that it goes through and we can check the status code. It's a 200, actually deceiving, because if we say response.text, there was nothing returned. So some websites will actually do this where they might give you a 200 back to make it think that like you're getting a successful response, but they're just returning an empty string. Or if you don't have the right configuration, they're like, hey, they need these minimum configurations in their request to the website to actually be able to get it back, to get data back. So a common thing that you can do to get around tricky websites is use something called headers. This is something you actually should just be putting in every request. But if you go on here, you can just Google what are my headers, and then click on this, just whatismybrowser.com. And if you scroll down, you can go to this user agent. As you can see, I'm on an older version of Chrome. Probably need to update that. And you just copy this right here. Come back here, and we're going to create a variable called headers. So we'll just say headers equals, and then in a dictionary, we want to pass in user-agent and as the key, and then the value is exactly what you just copied. And then we can make that request again. So we say response equals request.get to TikTok. Sorry, took me a little long. And then we'll say headers equals headers. So now, kind of taking a little bit longer. I'm going to add some more so we can see. So now if we say response.text, there we go. And you can also use different headers, or you can try and impersonate like a Microsoft service, like Bing, for example. You could try to impersonate like one of their bots that they have that's scraping the website. Try to impersonate Google as well. It's possible. It's a little bit harder. But that is kind of the basics of web scraping and really the basics of getting started with web scraping. So just a couple things to remember. Requests, we make a request to a website to get a response which has a status code, text, some information about the website. And then we can use BeautifulSoup to then parse that data out and kind of extract that and kind of clean it up and gather it and make it look better. Another thing, if you are getting blocked heavily by a website, this means that they're going out of their way to actually stop you from scraping their website. So one thing that you can try is called Proxies. So what a proxy service does is it just goes and it rotates your IP. So you're essentially impersonating yourself as if you were somewhere else. This is kind of what a VPN does. This is what these proxy services do. And they just rotate your IP address so then you can try and make it to seem that you're actually somebody else. There's actually some really good companies that offer this proxy service. Scraper API is one that I've used before that I really like. Another thing you can do is you can use a tool called Selenium, which basically allows you to do automated tasks. This is kind of a little bit more advanced web scraping with Selenium. This is where you can use code to open up a Chrome driver, Chrome browser, and then you can go around and click stuff on the website. You can kind of act more as a person and kind of act more as an actual person behind the computer with code rather than just sending a request to a website and trying to fetch all the data. So if there's enough interest, I will make a video on kind of some more advanced tutorials on web scraping and as well with Selenium, because I think Selenium is really cool and you can use it for a lot of stuff that maybe just using requests won't be able to do. That's it for this video, guys. Thanks for watching.